I'm just going live. We can continue
Yeah.
talking about it.
But like the dark color just makes it look like a regular laptop. Like that's my
It does
Yeah.
have the like fingerprint issue as well. Like it gets
yeah,
quite,
the mate, the yeah.
yeah, that kind of sucks. But yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, should we? It's been a while since last time we had a release. It's been a rough couple of weeks stabilizing. We were quite ambitious about things, but needed ambition, I guess. But things are feeling really like I sit in the evening now, and I don't have anything to do in the editor, but I just want to use it because I've kind of, yeah, talking about falling in love again. I kind of fell in love again with the editor after these 2 weeks.
Yeah,
You
I
need
agree.
to
Especially
fall in
now
love
with
with
the.
the sorry.
I'm
You
sorry.
need to fall in love with the CodeSandbox team as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I was about to say the same thing. Especially now we have this new layout, new theme supports. So yeah, really enjoying now. I guess
Yeah,
you're using the GitHub theme, right?
yeah. The thing is, I
And
can't like.
it feels
I
so great.
Yeah, the thing, what I really like when we changed it is the borders. I don't like it was weird. There was at some point we had like this mix of borders and like the old spacious rounded design, and then it looked really weird. But when the borders are there and everything's like, yeah, like the light. But the thing is, I think the CodeSandbox light theme looks better than the dark one because the dark one doesn't have borders. I'm not saying that it should have borders. It's just I just like the borders.
Yeah.
And may I ask something? Do you have any preference or strong feelings about the icons in the sidebar? Because just to give it more context, I think that our default theme is pretty monochromatic, and then these icons are very colorful. It's maybe too colorful
Yeah,
for our default theme.
yeah,
I personally like them. I like them in VS Code as well. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, to circle back on the editor, I just I because we were kind of in this rush of like shipping things and improving and fixing bugs, I didn't even stop to realize how good the experience is now compared to even like 3 or 4 weeks ago. It like I don't remember when, except for maybe some like maybe some weird infrastructure bugs. But I don't remember when was the last time when I stopped and say, like I stopped to think, is this like a problem? Is this slow or is this a bug? Or I just work now in it. I don't. 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was constantly getting out of focus because I was like working, then realizing this doesn't work well. Why doesn't this work well? Let me investigate. Going back to my task.
yeah,
This doesn't work well. Let me
Yeah.
investigate. And now it just works as you expected. Like the search, especially be on the more heavier project like CodeSandbox client. There's I don't feel coming from the previous version. I feel like this is just flying, and probably it still can be slower at times for different reasons, but still it's there. It's like the exact same experience as local development.
yeah. And I don't think we emphasize that enough. That we are just like Eva said in his presentation, like we actually build CodeSandbox with CodeSandbox. So when people feel like friction using it, we're feeling the friction as well, which is why I think we can do this. Like we can be ambitious and we can push things out because we need this tool to build it. And that's why we fix stuff so fast, because we notice it immediately. If there's like, especially with the critical flows, we use them all the time. So yeah.
I'm honestly scared of installing dependencies locally at this pace step, and I just, whenever someone says, oh, we need to go with the local environment, I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work. Like, I don't want to set up Docker or run scripts or install dependencies or even deal with Git in the terminal. No.
Yeah, it's really cool, like this idea of kind of abstracting away the environment. We kind of, in some sense, we have exposed more of the environment. Like we have the environment set up and all of that stuff, but that's like, maybe that's the learning here, is that, okay, there is one step, like you have to have some relationship to an environment. But the point is that when it's set up, you shouldn't have it, that relationship shouldn't like poke out all the time when you're just doing work. Like if you're going to review someone's code and suddenly like your dependencies aren't working, or the dev server doesn't start, or suddenly you have the wrong node version, like all of that stuff, that shouldn't be poking at you when you do work. That's just something you like set up once, and then it should work. Cool. Yeah, I thought we could, like last time we talked about, like we had this like very top level, like top down view of state management, and we talked about how like typically you have like this global state store, and then you just, that's how you share state in React. And then we talked about how instead of having like a single global state store, we would use these contexts instead. So it's kind of like having multiple state stores, and then you wrap them around, like you still have like some state management is global, some of it is related to the session of the user, some of it is related to a specific page, some of it is related to a specific feature, and so on and so on. And then we talked about what that means for the stuff in between. Like if you have like a session that is mounting a page, the components in between can now do the data fetching, and you can start using things like suspense and error boundaries related to these things. So you're kind of creating these, not only state management context, but you're creating these boundaries in your application for doing data fetching and suspense, and even lazy loading would work the same way. Where in a global setting, if you were to do lazy loading of state management, you can't really, it's not connected, like the component and the state management, it's two separate things. So lazy loading what belongs together, it's much trickier. But I thought we could like just completely flip it around and just talk about like how to achieve observability, because that's kind of the thing now with signals and stuff. How you kind of go against React in the sense that React is based on like reference comparison, or comparisons of comparison of state to figure out when to reconcile and stuff, and rather observe changes and then react to those changes. So for example, by the way, the count here is behind all of us. Maybe we should try to is there like a center thing going on here? Button, is it like an app CSS?
Probably some flex centering or just text align.
How many engineers does it take to go from centering something to not centering it?
There's a text align center on the root.
Oh my god. How do we move that?
Well,
And
what
the
if
margin.
Oh, auto.
Yeah.
well, what if you remove everything?
Oh, this is duplicate,
Oh, there you go.
isn't it? Oh, that's interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
but now
Yeah,
I think we can
I
see
can see.
just above Danilo. Anyways, so the way React works is like with traditional state management or managing or defining state is that every time you change the state, it reconciles, and it's like explicit. You change the state, like you call set count, and the reason it reconciles is because you call set count. It's like tightly integrated in React. But then there are other, like a different mechanism to do the same thing. And that's like, I guess it has had different terms, but like it's observability. And then I thought we could like use other libraries first, because this is not a new thing. So for example, Mobex has had this. So you can create like an observable count instead. And we have to create this on the outside. Let's call it state instead. Because of the reconciliation loop, you can't define these things inside of a component because it would be recreated all the time. Which is an interesting aspect of it.
It's one of the, I think this is one of the drawbacks of React, that whenever you need to create some sort of external stuff, you have to really put it somewhere that is really external from React. You cannot work within the framework.
Exactly. So if we do this, like the count is there, but when we click it, nothing happens, right? So there's nothing here like tracking that we are accessing this observable. So to make that work, you have to put this higher order component around it. I think is it called observer? I can't remember. It's from React Lite or something. Didn't I put that in here? Mobex. Oh, didn't I? I thought I did. Oh, I hope my voice. I've been sick for. I'm not completely recovered yet. By the way, it's kind of weird that. Did you see the install task? It doesn't have any label. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah, I have another issue to fix related to the dependent speaker, and then I will take a look at.
Oh, doesn't this have typing? What makes React Lite? I have to install the types for it. Oh, it's there. Yeah, observer. So if we put like an observer around it, I think it will work. Yeah, and then it works. So the question is like, what the hell is actually happening here? So with Mobex, you have to use an object for your observable. And the reason you have to use an object is because it needs to know that you're accessing something. It's like, when I say access, it's like state.count. That's like accessing the property count. If it was just a 0, there wouldn't be anything that was accessed. Like state would be 0. So there's no like way to track the access to it. Which is why signals, they have like signal dot, like you have to do, if it's a signal, you do signal dot value, because that's like accessing something. And the way it works with MobX is that it uses like a proxy, and then this object becomes a proxy, and the observer triggers like an observer context. So when this app function component body runs, there's an active observer context that just whatever globally inside MobX is being accessed, like any observable, it doesn't matter which one, where it's defined, has nothing to do with it. If anything's accessed, that's being like registered to that component. It's being kind of coupled there. So when I access state.count here, globally, MobX is seeing that, oh, this should be registered on this observer in this component. So the observer is tied to the component, and then that observer is activated when the app component body runs, and then whatever is accessed, it's registered to that observer. Which is nice, like, because then it doesn't matter what you access and where that thing you access is defined. It just automatically optimizes it, which is amazing. And the amazing thing about MobX is that with the use of proxies, you can even like, you can go into like nested properties and stuff, and it just works. You don't have to think about like that there's like a signal and you're accessing the signal. You just like access whatever you need, and then it will just optimally reconcile, which is great. But I would say there are like 2 drawbacks to this. One of them being that you have to add this observer. The other thing is that there's no like structure around it. Like you have to figure out where the hell do I put all these observables. You can't put them in components. You can't put them in like a context. You would have to use like special hooks for that. Or you can put it like completely globally and use something like MobX state tree, or you can create your own class system. Have any of you used MobX, like MobX state
No,
tree
I
or
have not.
classes? Yeah.
Not really in production code, just like playing with
Yeah.
it. I think this was the biggest like turn off, the fact that you didn't have a clear way of reaching into state from within React in a, I guess, in a hooks fashion, because that's how
Yeah.
you want to consume things, right? Because you want to connect state to other things and have it accessed in custom hooks, and then if you just import like global objects, it just feels
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
it's like anyone can do anything, and then you're like
Yeah.
it's very hard. I think it's hard to scale without good discipline somehow. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also like the opinionated pattern from MobX is to use classes. Like it has a lot of utilities and even decorators for classes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you're changing to a different paradigm than what React is actually built for, maybe it's okay that it's not only that you're using like observable state as opposed to like immutable state or whatever you want to call it, but you also move from this functional paradigm to like the imperative class object oriented paradigm. So it's a big shift, but it's not necessarily bad. But anyone using it, they have to kind of be aware of that, and maybe it is like a big context switch. So like, okay, you're in the functional building the UI and stuff, and suddenly you're in this imperative world using private keywords and maps and sets, and like it's like very different. But
Yeah,
yeah,
plus I think the JSX way of writing UI is kind of becoming the de facto industry standard.
mm-hmm.
As much as it does, of course, not all frameworks have that, but it just feels like everyone is moving towards this kind of clearly defined, like a more almost like a fluid way of expressing UI with basically JavaScript.
Mm.
So yeah, it's hard to argue against uh, it, and it's hard to go back to, in my mind, it's hard to go back to classes and
Yeah.
template files and anything that resembles that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of value in functions. Just having functions. There's something about it. The tricky thing about React though is that a function isn't just a function. It's a function that's called like many times. But we'll get back to that. But then like part of this observable concept, you also have, I think it's called auto run in Mobex. So you can like console log state.count there. And then if I just move, let's see. Yeah. So you see now, since autorun accesses state, whenever that state changes, this autorun callback will run again. Like it's also called effect or whatever. And then you also have something called computed. Is it called computed in Mobex? I can't remember. Yeah, it's called computed. I think. Double. So if we rather log the double.
Be right back. Need to pick up a package, but I'm still listening.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, that didn't work. Oh. Oh, get? Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. We had to actually... Yeah, that's interesting. Anyways, so that's also like, sometimes it's called derived, but it's basically the same thing. And the power of this is that like you can still access this double thing, and if nothing has changed within the like observable state, it will kind of cache the value. So it's very efficient.
Cool. Maybe you will get there, but as everything lives outside of the main component, what happens if it is component amount and I want to reset the state value?
Yeah.
Like as I can see now, this is a global state. I can access it from whenever I want for the place I want, the component I want. But what happens if I wanted to reset it, to make it a local state?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem. I think it's like the only thing you can like reliably do when you have global state is like you can have subscriptions tied to components, because they are like you subscribe and then you unsubscribe whenever the component, like it has nothing to do with mounting and unmounting in React. That's the problem. So you can do that, but if you actually want to say that when this component unmounts, I want to reset this state, you would think that you can do like use effect, and then like when it's disposed, you could say state.count equals 0. And I think there's like two issues with this. The first issue is that it's just put in some component. It's like the component that's responsible for resetting the state, as opposed to some state management layer. But this might happen at any time. Like that React with its like what's it called, the concurrency model, this use effect can be called whenever. You can't rely on it, so you will kind of reset things when you don't want to reset it, or you want to dispose of it, or it will dispose of things when you don't want it to be disposed, because you, as you say, you want it to happen when it unmounts, but you can't reliably do it. And that's kind of a nice separation. Having a global state store is that you have React world here. You can't really like do stuff on mount and mount reliably, and then you have like your state management over here where you can do that. But very often it's very nice to do things when the component unmounts. It's kind of weird that we ended up here, and I still don't understand it. Like, I still have that open issue at React. Like we need to know when components get out of the UI. Like, and they literally are removed from the UI at some point. Why can't we know when that happens reliably? It's really funny. But yeah, it's really interesting how state is so tied to, even though when you share state across components, it's still bound to some UI. And in a global state store, it isn't bound to UI. You have to orchestrate how that state behaves related to how your UI behaves. Which is why we explored like using these contexts instead, because then your state management is bound to your UI. So you get more a natural way of managing when the state management
the context, the provider pattern can bring a lot of encapsulation in the architecture.
Yeah.
Which you need because otherwise it just and otherwise any model works. Like literally anything works as long as you have 2 pages and 3 components. But the moment when things scale up, you really need to be confident that, you know, adding stuff to your project doesn't overall just make it heavier or just creates more re-render cycles. Like working on a tiny little thing in a bottom of the screen doesn't trigger the whole, you know, app to re-render countless times and just degrade in performance over time.
Yeah.
And when you're working, that's the problem, that when you're working at a very low level in the app, you don't want to be concerned with these things. Like that's the most frustrating thing, because with React you always have to be careful with every PR that you put in that affects UI in a meaningful way. It's like, am I introducing some sort of, you know, re-rendering cycle here, or that's, I want to just code. I don't want to worry about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that everyone kind of wants that, like just not have that concern anymore about like performance. And even though it makes sense what React is doing with this, what's it called, Forget project that automatically memoizes things, it's still very much tied to using local component state and passing state as props. Like, even though you have a context provider with state and you use Forget, it will optimize and memoize the stuff you put into the context. And it will even memoize the value exposed on the context. But still, if anything changes within that context, then it's still, the context itself will change its value. It has to change its value for the consuming components to reconcile. But that is the whole problem. Like, you can't, when you share state, you want also that shared state to be consumed by any component and not reconcile unnecessarily. And you just can't do that with a normal context. The more state you have in a normal context, the less performant your app is going to be, because any consuming component will reconcile whenever any state within that context provider changes. So there's like 2 parts to this, I guess. One thing is like using observable state to like completely just get rid of that knowledge of how does the state I expose now affect the reconciliation. You just completely remove that because you don't care about that anymore. You can just safely use any observable state, and it's optimized. But then it's also, how do you share that observable state? That's like a challenge. Do you do it globally? How would you do it bound to a certain piece of UI through a context? And I think you could use MobX. Like if you did, does it have use observer? Is that, I don't know, does MobX have like local component state? Use local store?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think like use local store or something.
Aren't those only in MobX state tree, or what's the
What's this? Oh, use use local observable. Yeah, that's it. So what I think you could do, I haven't really explored this, but if you had like a my store provider, you could do like, we could do the same as we do here.
Mhm.
Oh, why are you complaining? Oh. Why is it complaining? Oh, do I have to? Oh, yeah, of course. You have to do this, and that's to prevent it from like reinitializing all the time. And this is the thing, right? It's, as soon as you try to merge these two concepts, putting observability inside the reconciliation loop of a component, you start getting into problems. So as you saw, I tried to like put an object here, but the problem inside here now is that every time this object is passed, it has a new reference every time it reconciles. So I guess they put like a function here to kind of, I'm actually not sure why they chose to put a function here. But it's weird, right? It's different. But what you could do is create context. Isn't that the thing? Oh, do I do this and then does this work? Ah, it doesn't matter. Provider, context of provider. And then we could do like value state like this, and then children. So the point here is just that, come on, children react node. And then we could wrap this thing in return my store provider, and then app, something like that. Not sure why this is complaining. App wrapper.
Yeah.
Something like that. But then we also have to, can I do this? Observer. Oh,
no, I don't.
but this is the thing, like I
Does it
can't
work?
put it here. I have to put it up here. So now I have to call this app observer, because this is the thing that's observing.
Yeah.
Why is this complaining?
The high order component felt like a great idea when it first appeared, but it's just it's trickier to get it to function with how React is written, I guess, in 2024 almost.
Yeah. Why is it component is not a function? Do you know what it's complaining about? Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry. And then we have to, let's see. State would be use context. Then we would do it like this instead. And then, yeah, I guess that's it. So now we're consuming it through, and this is still working. And the point is now that I could like extend this. I could say foo bar. And if this component is only accessing count now. So if I were to change foo, this component wouldn't reconcile, even though I'm using the context, because it's the same state object that's being exposed on the value here, regardless. And I could extend this. I could say like change count. And in MobX, you would use like, you should really wrap everything in like this action thing, or increase count. But then the thing is, I also have to use callback. Because we don't want that reference to change. And then we will also have to use memo around here, because we don't want this object to ever change, actually. So what happens in, so this will be, sorry about the state, increase count would be like void, something like that. So the point is that we are creating this object, and that object will stay the same. It's the properties that change over time, not the object itself. And then we add our own action here with MobX that just protects the state, so that the only way to actually change something within any observable is through an explicit action. That's why we got a warning all the time when we were mutating. But then we also have to use a memo, because we have to ensure that the value we actually expose on the context never changes. Because that will make any consuming component reconcile. So now we kind of hard-coded the value of the context. Sorry, Alex?
No, I wanted to ask, like, isn't there a way to, like, for MobX to expose, like, the object that contains both the state and the actions
yeah.
as a memoized object? Because it's almost like you need to define, it's almost like instead of using memo there in line, you could have this as the state of the provider, and then whenever something happens, you set state. So you ensure that the value is always the same reference, but then it changes through the...
I'm not sure if they actually have, if they have like kind of a store kind of thing. Local observable, at least not at this level. It's funny you should ask, because I was inspired the last time you talked about this. Like we talked about like these contexts in impact, which is kind of the same thing as we're doing here. Like we're explicitly defining like signals and actions and stuff like that, and you could define them as a higher abstraction, like a store, where you just define, here's some state, here are the actions that can change that state, and so on. But my point is that here is that there isn't any, I haven't seen anyone try to allow you to expose observable MobX through a context provider. But this is what you kind of have to do to make that happen, at least under the hood. You could create an abstraction over this, but this is how it would have to. This is how it would have to work. So I guess state count, increase count. Oh, sorry, it's the opposite. Counter increase count. Oh, that didn't work. Does anyone see why it doesn't work?
Not really.
Yeah, that's weird. Oh, it's not even calling it. Isn't that how action is defined?
But the action there is returned. Yeah. Yeah, what if you don't use the use callback?
Oh, that's interesting.
Huh.
Why did it use callback?
Oh, doesn't need to depend on the
Oh, yeah, I
state?
guess it should be like
Yeah.
this. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but you see what the hell? Oh my god.
The doom of the parentheses.
There we go. Yeah, this should work. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Oh, we see.
Yeah, because it
There
returns
was
The
an
the...
function
extra function.
returning the callback.
But then it's like you still, even though we kind of hard coded this in place, but the my store provider might reconcile because of a parent component. And when that parent component reconciles, this code will run again. But it's fine, right? It will still work. But you're kind of calling use local observable again. You're calling use callback again. And the whole point of this, of observable state, is that you don't have to do that. You don't have to be part of the reconciliation loop to make it work. It actually works like better without being part of the reconciliation loop, which I guess is why nobody has really tried to do this, because they're kind of there's two worlds just completely crashing together, which is really interesting. But yeah, like what we like explored with impact, you could do the same with MobX, create an abstraction over MobX to do the same, kind of hide these like quirks. But you wouldn't be able to identify when the store provider unmounts, for example, because then you rely on a use effect to do that. And as we talked about, the use effect can be called, the disposer can be called multiple times without the component actually being unmounted. But anyways, I wanted to also show something else that's also really interesting, which is if we just remove all of this stuff. Remove the observer, remove this stuff, remove this stuff, and we can even app. Let's try to use Preact, because then it gets kind of fun. Preact signals react. Yeah, now you're going to see some crazy magic. So we're going to have the count again. We're going to create a Preact signal. And as you can see, this uses like count value like this. And then value. And what's insane now is that you see there's nothing, we're not observing. There's no observer higher order component. We just created a count globally. We started consuming it in a component, and magically it just starts reconciling, which is kind of insane.
It's way simpler.
Yeah.
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 But how is that possible?
Yeah, exactly.
What is the trick here?
The thing is that they're
how does the signal work on a value here?
Yeah, so it's the exact same principle that you can imagine that there is an actual observer higher order component here, or at least that when this component body runs, there is an active observer context that was created when it started running this component body. And just like MobX, any signal defined, like Preact Signals knows globally about all signals created. And when they are accessed, there is an active observer context that's tracking access to any signal, regardless of where that signal has been defined. The trick, though, is this this piece of code that isn't as crazy as it looks. Like, I had to read it like 10 times to go from what the fuck is this to that's what they're doing.
This even using the famous variable "do not use it or you'll be fired."
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy to see it is.
But the hint is actually right here, and it's when even in production you have access to the React dispatcher, and the React dispatcher is an object that holds a reference to all the hooks. So when you do, the way I understand it at least, is when you use like set count. When you use a use state or any other hook in a component, that acts like a proxy to the current React dispatcher. So when I call use state here in this like standalone hook, that actually points directly into the active React dispatcher. And there are different implementations of the use state hook depending on the life cycle of React. What state is the dispatcher in at the moment you're calling that use state hook? So by default, the React dispatcher is in like a invalid hook state. You aren't allowed to call any hooks, which is why if you were try to call use state like outside here, you would get like some kind of error from React stating that that's an invalid context. And then as React starts like running a component body, it switches out the dispatcher. And then if you were to like do something like this, it changes out the dispatcher again, because in here you can't use hooks. So it flips out the dispatcher, and this happens like many different places throughout different usage of hooks and contexts in React. It changes out the dispatcher. And this is what Preact does. It overrides when React tries to access the dispatcher and looks at it. What are the implementations of these different hooks now to identify what state is the dispatcher in? And then they have, and that's the funny thing. There's like, where is the, this is, yeah, here you can see it. So first they go in and they go in and override the, there's something called the current dispatcher. It's a property. And they override it. So whenever that dispatcher is set, it goes in and checks what kind of dispatcher is it, and then it's able to like hook into that. So this is what happens here. It's like it goes and gets the current dispatcher type, and then the next dispatcher. And then it compares, like, does these types of dispatchers, do they reflect that we're now entering a component render? And if it does, it starts like, it creates like an observer context, and then it tracks the signals accessed. And then it also identifies, is restarting component render, is exiting component render, which means that the observer context is like done. And the funny thing is like how it actually identifies the different types of dispatchers it's literally looking at the function string. So it's doing like toString. And then it checks like in a certain context, the useReducer hook is the same function as the useEffect hook. And that means it's like one type of dispatcher. And then in another context, the useEffect hook is the same function as useImperative handle hook. And then it's the server dispatcher. And then it just checks, does the function string of use callback, what's it called? Yeah, use callback hook. Does it have the text invalid? Well, then it's the warning dispatcher. And it does all of these checks. It's kind of insane. But that's how it works. It literally just, hacks into React.
Yeah, it's impressive.
It's
very impressive.
It's insane
like
and impressive.
Yeah, it seems there's a lot of dirt work behind the scenes, and we just see this beautiful abstraction that we can simply use it.
Yeah.
So very impressive.
Yeah, but I mean that's what you want.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? As a consumer of a library or a framework, you want to hide the dirt under the hood and get use of the best experience for as long as, of course, this doesn't involve trade-offs. Like if that dev experience means that you actually get bad performance when you overuse it, then it's not a good trade-off.
Yeah, and this implementation is even crazier when you scroll down, because they do not only hook into the reconciliation loop of React, they also hook into the creation of elements. So if I go in here and I don't do count.value, but I do just count, then I think this should still work. Yeah. But what happens under the hood now is that there is no reconciliation happening. It just updates the button when I click this, because I'm using the signal itself, not the value. But so it binds the signal to this element.
And when you use .value, the component will go to the reconciliation loop again, right?
Yes. Because what happens here is that nothing's really accessing count.value during the execution of the component function. Nothing's accessing it. It's I'm not actually sure. I haven't actually looked into the code, but it doesn't happen through the execution of the component body. It happens when the child is evaluated. That's when Preact is going in and overriding the evaluation of the children and sees that, there's a signal in this child. So I'm going to go and grab its value, but I'm going to wrap that in its own observer context. So whenever that thing changes, I'm just going to change out the child. I'm not sure how it actually does that, but it does it. So you have these surgical updates, which is in my opinion, it's really cool that they kind of made that actually work and kind of create a proof of concept of what if React had first-class support for signals. But the reconciliation loop is extremely fast, within the context of a single component. It's when you have the shared state that you get into issues where you have one context provider that might affect 100 components, and 99 of them doesn't really care about that reconciliation because it's just one of them using the state that actually changed within the context, which might sound like an extreme example, but for something like CodeSandbox, we do have a shit ton of components using state. or shared state. But it's so cool to see that they actually made this work.
Yeah. It seems very smart.
Yeah. And they have the same thing, right? They have something called effect, and then they have computed, I think, here as well. Yeah, it's the same concept. But unlike MobX, you don't have to call like get. You can just do count.value. The cool, like the nice thing about MobX is that you don't have to think about this value. You can just use objects, which feels nice. But the cost there is that you're actually you're just mutating stuff. While in signals, you're changing the value. You're still in the React world in the sense that you have to replace values for React to handle it. You're not mutating anything.
I think after years of React, just a direct object mutation somehow feels wrong.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah. And that's, I remember when, what's his name? Michel, who built MobX, who also built Immer. I remember the comment from the React team. It's like, MobX is like, doesn't fit React, but Immer does. And they use the same technology. It's the same thing that happens. It's like it's using a proxy to detect mutation, but in Immer you return an immutable result, which is exactly what React wants, and which Preact also does. But yeah,
but I think the value thing is sort of becoming standard as more frameworks are adopting signals as the primitive for observability.
The alternative API for it is to do like you call count.
Yeah, like in Solid.
And then you can like do something like this to set it, which is, I think personally, I think that looks weird.
Now you can set it with I think it has. I mean, if I remember correctly, Solid, it
like
should
a
have
callback.
Like a previous value.
Yeah, you can do that as well. Yeah, that was a bad example, but still, I prefer the other thing. But what I think is the most interesting thing about like this, like proof of concept, I want to call it proof of concept from Preact, is that it shows you the surgical updates that Solid does. Like Solid also has this, Solid.js. But what Solid.js doesn't have, that this implementation have, is, funny enough, the reconciliation loop. So if you were to consume the count, current count or whatever, up here, and you wanted to say if current count equals 0, return foo. If current count equals 1, return bar. Like if you wanted to do this in Solid, this wouldn't work. You can't do this in Solid because it doesn't have a reconciliation loop, which like wasn't obvious to me when I saw Solid for the first time. I kind of had to play around with this stuff to kind of understand the power of the reconciliation loop. I've been hating on it for so long, but this is the main benefit of the reconciliation loop, is that you can use normal code, normal JavaScript for control flow. I think that's the right term for this. And you can use switch statements and everything, and typing and everything just works because it's just a language. As opposed to in Solid, you would have to, if you're doing if you're using an if, you would have to do show, I think. And if you use a switch statement, you have to use a switch component. And if you use a for loop, you have to use a for component. And then in these components, they start breaking in terms of typing and stuff because it's not the language. So that's the beauty I see with Preact's implementation, is that even though it does crash a bit with React, it still shows like it's possible to combine reconciliation with observable state, and you kind of get the best of both worlds.
And the JSX part is fully compatible, like you said,
Yeah.
with Solid or
Yeah.
any other frameworks. They usually rely on their own primitives to I mean, yeah, it comes with trade-offs. Like we learned in React to use this function as to accept it as this will always run. Whenever
Yeah.
something changes, this runs. Like you just common, but in Solid you use it almost like an initializing of the component because it only runs once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I kind of hope to achieve with the impact implementation, is that having that function running once makes a lot of sense for state management, because that's how you think about state management. It's like you define some state, you define some actions to change that state. You might have some effects related to state changing, but you don't want that that definition to run again and again and again. But it makes completely sense for UI components that they run again and again and again, because that is what allow you to have in-language control flow and all the goodness and all that stuff. Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't have any goal of any conclusion or anything. It was just, I wanted to just talk through these things. Yeah, because I think it's super, like, for me it was very educational, just running through all of these and make these reflections and so on.
Yeah, but what's amazing to see that there are so many different approaches to solve the same issue, and how we can leverage this experience and improve the impact experience.
Yeah.
And if we are trying to find some conclusion, I don't know, I feel that the Preact, it's amazing. And I wish we could have it in our code base. I really like it.
Yeah, because I guess maybe that's kind of a cool conclusion, is like with the impact implementation, it's not as intrusive as Preact. Because impact also has automatic observation. Like you don't have any observer components or anything like that. But the way it does it is that since you define all your state management in a context, whenever that context is consumed, we know that you're in a component, because that's the only place you can consume it. So it's not that we're analyzing the React dispatcher to figure out when we're in a component. It's by the fact that the component is consuming a context. So that's what kind of sets it off. But then it does use the React dispatcher to figure out when it's not in that component function body anymore, because that's the difficult part. It's like, when are you not when do you exit the component body? That's the thing. But yeah, because that's really, you really just want to write React as React, and then whatever you expose of observability shouldn't like affect that code. Ideally, it should just work, which, yeah, Preact is a really cool example of.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. But yeah, we're getting a bit over time. But yeah, I guess that's it. And I thought maybe like next time we could start using this stream as like we did now. Like we looked at Preact and we looked at MobX, and we're constantly sharing this. Oh, did you see this CSS library? This is kind of cool. How the hell does this work? How did they do this?
Yeah.
And that would be kind of fun to do on this stream.
Yeah, how do they do this? Like that
How did
sounds
they
like
do
a
this
fun
stream?
name. Three
Yeah, like
engineers
the one
figuring
that
out how the hell do they do this?
Yeah, then one of us can be responsible for actually trying to figure it out, and then the other ones can join the stream and try to guess how they did it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All
But
right.
okay,
Cool.
Cool.
thanks so much. We'll talk later.
See ya.
See ya.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye.